Alright guys, Avi Outdoors here, and today, since I can't get out and fish, I'm going to go ahead and break down my top five springtime bass lures. Now, to start it off at the top of the list, I think at the top of most people's list is something that is so universal and so easy to throw and has so many applications. That would probably be the Texas rig. Now the Texas rig, I'm going to go ahead and rig up a Senko for you right here. The Texas rig is a super simple but extremely effective rig. All it is a hook. Go ahead and tie it onto your line. Just using a little uni knot. You could go ahead and trim that excess off. And then you take a plastic worm, whatever color, doesn't matter. I prefer green pumpkin. I think green pumpkin is probably one of the best worm colors out there. Colors for anything. I prefer green pumpkin swim baits, green pumpkin everything. So then you're just gonna go ahead, rig up your worm if that's what you're using. Slide it up. I like to cover the knot, and then go ahead and push that through, and you want to measure it up, see where your hook point's going to sit. See, I did that. Now I'm going to go ahead and skin hook it a little bit. So now this is rigged up Texas rig. This is weightless, but I can also go ahead and, before tying that knot, slip on a little weight. Now I use lead weights. You can use tungsten. Tungsten is better, but it is also a little bit more expensive. So now you have a weighted Texas rig. So when I would throw weight is when either I want to cast it a little bit further or I want a different kind of presentation. Normally with a Texas rig, when I fish weightless, I want that worm just fluttering down slowly, making those little micro movements that get bass to go ahead and bite it. With the weight, you can dig it along the ground, if you're fishing open, away from cover, or if you're in cover, you can just go ahead, throw it through and let it sit to the bottom, drag a little bit, let it sit, drag a little bit, let it sit. And you can also go ahead and pin this with a bobber stop. I can go ahead and show you how I would do that. The way you put on a bobber stop basically with this little thing is it's really handy. You get your loop out, put it over your line, and you would do this before putting on your weight and hook. I'm just using a loose piece of line here, and then you're going to want to just slide that down. And so now that weight's not going to move, and I have a nice weedless presentation. This is a nice Texas rig. Now I can also go ahead and throw on a fluke onto this rig. Let me show you that. Should have a fluke over here. That is a extremely effective spring bait as well. I like to fish it on a Texas rig. I like to fish it weightless, jerking it as I'm pulling it through grass, heavier cover, and of course I always try to fish every bait weedless. So that covers, I think, most of what you'd get into really with your Texas rig. Usually you're fishing a worm, a fluke. Sometimes you'll fish a creature bait. You can go ahead and throw a creature bait on there with a little bit of a heavier weight and punch through the lily pads, punch into the heavier cover, and you could just kind of flip and pitch through there. And this will, again, it'll sink down. These kickers will make movement. The bass will see that. It entices them. It gets them to want to bite it. You could fish a lot of different style hooks, although the most popular and the most common you're going to find is your EWG, just kind of general worm hook. So this is the extra wide gap, and you want that because that gives you more hook to really push into that fish's mouth when you're trying to set it. You want to keep them pinned. You don't want to let them just get off. What you don't want to fish is, if I have one even in here, there, is one of these. This is an extremely flimsy worm hook. This thing will bend, it'll break, and when you actually get the fish that you're looking for, you probably won't land it the same way you would if you were using a good sturdy hook. So that is a Texas rig, just very simple rig, hook to line. You can add a weight, you can pin the weight, or you could do weightless and just fish Senko. Again, I like for Senkos, I use a Strike King shimmy stick, and this is watermelon red black. I have green pumpkin chartreuse swirl. I also like to use my favorite, which is just the standard green pumpkin. This is where I throw just my loose plastics, but I do like to fish green pumpkin above most other colors for worms, and that is more of an all year round color for me anyways. So now let's get into the next bait, which is going to be, all right, number 2 on the list, topwater frog. Probably one of my favorite baits to throw all year round here in South Florida. Now there are a few different styles and a few different sizes. One of the styles you'll see, which is pretty common, is the soft plastic frog with the paddle legs. Now these paddle legs kick up a ton of action on the surface of the water, kind of fluttering, and that draws the fish from deeper down. They feel the vibrations, they come up and they'll crush it. So generally the strikes that you'll get on a frog, especially of this size, are going to be solid quality fish. So this is a great option to use. This is better fished in more open water, not really around cover. It will get snagged, will get kind of dinged up, messed up, torn. So this is more of a open water style frog. Next you have, this is the Z-Man popping frog. Now this kind of bridges the gap between your standard paddle leg frog like this and your hollow body frog, because the Z-Man material, like in all the other Z-Man baits, the Elastec is super buoyant, so it floats on top. So you don't have to worry about a bait like this sinking with this kind of lure, because with this Elastec it'll still float on the surface even when you pause. So how I fish this is I will kind of burn it across the top, let the legs do all that work. These have a ton of action. Or I'll be popping it along the top, and then I'll just let it sit. And because of the material, it'll just float on the top of the water. The bass will see it just like they would a hollow body, and you could let it pause, and these legs will still continue to kind of kick up around with the water. So they'll still move. And those little micro movements, the same with any other lure, kind of what get that bass to go from, am I going to eat this, to boom, inhaling it. So again, I'll just like to pop it using this popping lip, chug it along, let it sit, same as I would fish a regular frog. Now, hollow body frogs, they come in different sizes, different colors. I've caught fish on almost every color out there. I don't think color matters as much as size and style. You have your popping frogs and you have your standard frog. Now, the popping frogs I think are great to cover a lot of water, early morning, late evening, which is how I would fish most frogs around springtime in general. And this is a great lure that you can just go ahead and get a lot of strikes on when you're fishing along the bank, when you're fishing along that open water. It brings a lot of fish in because it's so loud. It creates such a big commotion on the top of the surface each time you chug it along and make that pop. Puts up a ton of water, splashes, makes noise, great little bait. Now, when you don't want to be making so much noise, you want to be more of a finesse style, then you'd go to your standard frog. This is also better suited for throwing it into heavy cover. So into your lily pads, into your hydrilla, into whatever it is, your tall grass, this will be able to get through there and get out without getting hung up. Now, I like to fish frogs on anywhere from 35-pound braid to 65-pound braid. If I'm fishing open water, sometimes I will fish them on mono, just so I can get better casting distance. This frog's seen better days. It's a little beat up. This is a just standard frog. They're not too expensive. You can go to Walmart, get a cheaper style. I believe this is a live target frog. It's got the nice natural frog color, lighter green on the bottom, darker green up top. This is a lunker hunt frog. This is, I believe, the Kraken. bigger style. Now, with the bigger style frog like this, the bites you'll get will be those bigger quality fish. That's not to say you can't catch big fish on the smaller presentation. Sometimes you'll catch a bigger fish going down a size than going up, because a lot of people are throwing these larger sizes of frogs. So when you throw something a little bit different but with a similar presentation, that kind of changes things for them. They're like, hey, I haven't seen that, I'm gonna go hit that. But I do like to throw the bigger frogs around heavier cover, around big pads. I want to get that distance, and I want to make noise. I want to get noticed. So this is black. I like to fish black or darker tones. You can fish on either clear or a little bit overcast days, chartreuse or white. Those are great colors as well. Again, I'm just fishing this, throwing it into heavier cover, lily pads, hydrilla, grass, whatever it is. You can toss it all the way in there and rip it out, because when you're using your heavier braid and you're using this weedless design, it's not really getting snagged the way you would other baits. So the frog is a great option. You can use it in a lot of different places, and I'd say it's pretty universal for catching bass. Alright, now let's go on to number 3 on my list for top 5 spring baits and spring lures to catch bass would be the Swimbait. I think the Swimbait is probably one of my favorite lures to throw all year round, but especially in springtime. Because right now what the bass are doing is they're laying up on their beds, and either they have already laid their eggs or they're going to, but they're sitting on their beds and they're protecting them. Now, they're protecting them from a few different things. They could be protecting them from shad, from bluegill, from crappie. These are fish that are going to come in there and steal the eggs. These are natural enemies of the bass. So matching the hatch to those kinds of presentations will get you more fish than just throwing a color because you think it looks good. It doesn't matter how natural it looks, you want it to look like something that they want to kill or eat. A lot of the time, bass will just short strike a swimbait just because they're only trying to kill it. They're trying to get it away from the area that they're spawning in. Now, some of the swimbaits I like to throw are sometimes these longer zoom paddle tails. These are good if I'm fishing deeper water. I'll put that on a heavier swimbait hook and let it drag along the bottom. I also love the Strike King Rage Swimmers. Now, I like this kind of clear white with the sparkle underneath. This has a really good shiner shad look to it. Or I like your more natural shad patterns, your darker blues, your silvers. This is more of a bluegill pattern. And these are great lures to go ahead and target those springtime spawning bass. This is a Reaction Lures paddle tail. Here we have a Z-Man. This is a little bit smaller. This is something I wouldn't really throw around now. I want to fish a bigger presentation. I want to fish something that looks like a bluegill again, or a crappie, something that looks like a threat to these fish and to these fish's eggs. Now, a few ways to rig this and a few ways to fish this. As you can see, I have this rigged on a weighted swimbait hook. Now, these swimbait hooks have the little screw in. I think those are pretty essential if you're going to use a weighted hook. You got to have those in there, otherwise it's a weird way to rig it. I've seen some of the other ones that don't have that. It just doesn't look very good. But you're probably not going to run into that. Generally, swimbait hooks do have this little screw on. So this is a little bit of a heavier lead swimbait hook. I'm not sure exactly the size, but I'll throw probably heavier weight if I'm fishing deeper water, lighter weight obviously for shallower water. But I still want to have it lower to the bottom, lower to where those beds are. I want to keep it in the strike zone as long as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cast that swimbait out over where I think the fish are. I'm going to let it hit the bottom, and I'm just going to slow roll it back to me. And what that's going to do, if you have a good swimbait, is that's going to make that just long, wide paddling motion. Looks really natural, looks really good. It gets the fish biting. That is what I think just kills bass in the springtime. Love my swimbaits, love paddle tails. You can also fish it if you're fishing very shallow water. You can go ahead and fish it weightless. Or there are other ways to throw a swim bait. You can, just gonna move all this. You can take a, you can take a bullet weight and you can rig it on your line with your hook and have that act as the weight for it. Now what this does is it gives you a little bit of a different way to fish. Now with this weight that is sliding freely along the line, you can have your swim bait a little bit further up. Without the bigger hook, you obviously have more of a natural presentation. There's less there to get the fish suspicious about, and it just looks better in my opinion. Sometimes the presentation calls for that, because really if you look at the way this would look underwater, this would be diving down like a bluegill or a shad or a shiner trying to dive down to steal those eggs, and you skirt this along the bottom of the lake, the bottom of the pond, the bottom of the river, whatever you're fishing, and it looks like some kind of bait fish, forage fish, looking for forage, doing what they do best, going along the bottom, just hop it along. And that looks like a fish that's going along those beds now trying to steal those eggs. That is now an enemy of the bass. They want to kill that, they want to eat it. So I think that is another great way to rig it up. I'm actually going to go ahead and show you how I would do that. I'm going to use this one here. So again, just put on your little bullet weight. You could use tungsten, I use lead, it's a little bit cheaper. You don't care as much when you lose the weight. Just a little uni knot. Alright, and then you're going to go ahead and rig this the way you would most soft plastics. Just through the nose. You want to mark where that hook's coming out. And just like that. And now, like I said, that weight is going to slide, so when you cast that out and you let it hit the bottom, you're going to pull it back and retrieve it, and it's just going to look like a small bluegill or crappie coming along the bottom, looking for those eggs to steal. And that is what the bass are looking to avoid. That is what they want to kill. This is the time of year that they are in their most territorial state. You know, they're spawning, they're on their nest, they don't want anything around. So they're going to get rid of it. Sometimes you'll get a ton of short strikes on this. All it is a bass that's grabbing the back of it, pulling it away from the nest, and then dropping it. They won't always hit that and get the whole hook in their mouth. So sometimes I will scale down to a smaller swim bait, but generally I like the larger sizes, again, because it's more match the hatch, match the size. I think it's more important to match the size and profile than it is to match colors. But that is probably my number 3 bait for spring, is the swim bait. Love them all year round. I catch fish on them, but especially now when these fish are on these beds, I think these excel fishing that deeper water, fishing where the fish are all bedded up, where they have their nests. Alright, let's move on to number 4. Alright guys, so we spoke about Texas rig, we spoke about the frog, we spoke about swim baits. Now, my number 4 top favorite bait for springtime bass fishing is the crankbait. Now, either lipless or with a lip is good. I prefer to use these bluegill kind of shad style patterns, sorry, not bluegill shad, bluegill crappie style, because those are what the bass are looking out for as egg stealers. What happens is when the bass are on their beds, those bluegill are probably also either spawning or near their spawn, and they're also looking for forage. The second the bass leaves the bed, those bluegill are on top of it already stealing those eggs, which is why bass are so territorial. They're not going to leave their bed for just any lure. Even for any kind of reaction strike, you still want to get it down to where they are. So I think crankbaits really excel at getting to those deeper depths and putting out a ton of action. So I actually like to fish the deeper diving crankbaits at a lower speed or a lower retrieve, so that they'll dive down to where I want it, And then when I slow roll it, they're not floating up too much. They're staying in that perfect depth right above where the bass are, right next to their beds. That's where you want to be with your crankbaits. That is what you're trying to get the fish to hit. You want to put it right on their nose, because these fish, again, they're on these beds. They're not going to move off for just any lure. But these are great lures to use. You can get them with a more subtle rattle inside. You can get them with a little bit louder pitch. I like the deeper tones for it. I find I get more strikes on that than I do the really loud, high-pitched crack inside of the crankbait. But again, I like to fish the natural patterns in springtime. That would be my shad pattern, bluegill, crappie, baby bass, all really good colors to use, really solid for springtime bass fishing. Alright, now let's move on to my fifth. Okay guys, so we went through the Texas rig, frog, swimbait, crankbait, and now number 5 on my list for top 5 springtime bass fishing, the chatterbait. I love throwing the chatterbait. I like throwing it in the winter, I like throwing it in the spring, I like throwing it in the summer, and I like throwing it in the fall. I like throwing it all year round. I think it is a great lure. Now, obviously the size will depend for what season you're throwing it in. Right now in the springtime, I like to use the larger sizes that get down a little bit deeper. I like to use the natural colors, again, like this white. Sometimes I will go ahead and throw a trailer on there. Usually I like a trailer that has a little bit of a different color to it, so I'd probably throw on maybe a paddle tail like that, or some sort of craw pattern that'll just kind of flutter, give it a little bit more action. I think chatterbaits are a great way to cover a lot of water and to get those fish to get more on that reaction strike. It puts out a ton of flash, it gets really good vibration underwater. There's something about it that the fish kind of can't resist. Now the other day in the MTB unboxing, you saw I got this lure right here. This is kind of like a chatterbait style deal. Now I didn't get to catch anything on this yet, but I did go ahead and take it to a local pond just to see the action. I don't have any footage of that, unfortunately, but it has a really nice kind of wobbling side to side action. I don't know if I mentioned that in the other video. Really nice wobbling side to side, puts out some good shine with that golden blade. I prefer the silver. I prefer the silver and white pattern. Sometimes I'll go to those darker bluegill patterns. Z-Man makes great chatterbaits. And yeah, that's number 5. It's not so much to cover, really. There's not so much to cover about chatterbaits, because it's similar to how you're going to fish any other bait in the spring. You're trying to get it down to where the fish are feeding, to where the fish are sitting on their beds, attacking the bluegill that are coming up to try to steal those eggs. Or even the bluegill that are going past before the eggs have been laid. Those bass are territorial. All they think now is, anything comes near this nest, I'm gonna eat it and I'm gonna kill it. So this is a bait that I would probably throw towards the late afternoon. I know some people like using it early morning. I don't. I think it's best fished late afternoon, early evening, around the shallower. You can't go too deep with a chatterbait. You're not going to get those bites, and you know, above anything above 10 feet I think is kind of your limit for a chatterbait. Now, is it possible to catch fish at deeper depths? Yeah, sure, people do it all the time, but it is not a comfortable style of fishing that I do. So I will fish this around, like I said, late afternoon. I'll fish it anywhere from 5 to 10 feet depth of the water that I'm in, and I'll kind of let it sink before I go ahead on my retrieve, because like I said, everything is trying to get into that strike zone. You want all your baits in that strike zone, which is right above the fish where they are in their beds. Sometimes even if you're fishing a jig, which I didn't mention in this video, but I should put in an honorable mention, swim jig or regular jig. Let's go ahead and take that out of here. These are going to be hopped along the bottom. You're going to want to leave these to sit inside the nest, or right around the nest, right around that bass's bed. These are going to get hammered this time of year. I like this, I believe is Okeechobee Craw color. I'm not sure. It's with the green pumpkin and the blue. As you can see, a lot of my favorite lures and style baits come in that color. Craws as well. Jigs are a great springtime bait. I just don't like to fish them too often in the springtime. I prefer them, I don't know, I don't really fish jigs too often in general, to be honest. They are a great way of catching fish, and I know that when I'm not getting any bites, I can switch to a jig and I'll probably start getting bites. Because the jig you can go through a lot of ground, you can cover a lot of ground with a jig. It's a slower moving bait, generally has a little bit of a more enticing presentation. You're not looking just for that reaction strike. It does have to look good for the fish to hit it. So you want to present your jigs well. You want to have a good action. A lot of the time when I find fish will hit a jig is just when I leave it sitting there. Leave it sitting there and let the trailer do all the work, because that trailer is just going to pulse and move around if you have a good one on there. But yeah, so chatterbait's number 5 on the list, and that covers it. So Texas rig, frog, I believe we said swimbait, crankbait, chatterbait. Those are my top 5 springtime baits. Now I'm going to be doing another video pretty soon reviewing the Lew's American Hero, as well as going over what you need to start as a budget fisherman, because not all the gear I use is very expensive, and I want to get into doing a little bit of a mini series of just showing how you can go out, have a great time without spending a ton of money. Anyways, that's all for now, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. Take care, and we'll see you next time.